So what I want to do this morning first is to finish the discussion of civil rights. And we're going to start here on slide 50. I think there are two more. So again, enforcement of civil rights and protection of civil liberties is not built into American government and culture, and nor is it built into many community traditions, nor is it inexpensive. The evidence indicates that all levels of government regularly violate civil liberties around the country, even when court decisions and laws prohibit such actions. And we talked about some of the reasons for this. So the future of civil liberties and civil rights really depends on the American people, because governments will routinely violate them, not necessarily out of ill will, as we talked about in this slide here, but rather because courts have minimal enforcement powers, because of normal bureaucratic behavior, because of government shutdowns and budget cutbacks, because of crisis and gridlock in government, any number of reasons, as well as perceived, I might add, as well as perceived foreign threats. So the bottom line is that the Constitution is not self-implementing. Nobody will wave a magic wand and make it happen just as it's written or just as the courts have interpreted. And keep in mind as well, we're not going to cover this, and very few, almost no introductory American government courses cover this, but keep in mind that there are roughly 13 million people, 13 million people doing work under contract with the federal government. These are private corporations, businesses, individual citizens, community organizations, and they are, in theory, doing the work of the federal government under contract. The fact remains that they are not adequately supervised. It would take literally an army of people to supervise them. They are people in the private, quote-unquote, private sector who are supposedly implementing federal government services and programs, and sometimes they do a very poor job, and often they're not closely monitored. And so when people are in that situation, when businesses are in that situation, the possibility for violations of civil liberties and civil rights goes up dramatically. Probably the poster child for this is private prisons, or for that matter, private schools, or homeschoolers, who are doing the work of, of education or imprisonment, but doing it in a way with often with minimal supervision. So government actions as well as non-actions can determine whether civil rights and civil liberties are respected. And again, it really depends on the American people whether or not they are going to be respected and be an integral part of our political system. So one way to think about civil liberties and civil rights, certainly the President over the weekend was thinking about them this way, is that they're a constitutional aspiration. This is what we hope for. These are the protections that we seek. These are the rights that we want guaranteed. But the policy reality is that these civil liberties and civil rights are contested. They're not fixed. They're dependent upon the actions of governments and government officials and the knowledge and resources and action of the American people, much like what President Obama said over the weekend. Are there comments or questions at this point? This is, I believe, it is my last slide, and then I need to go back to move on to Chapter 6, political socialization and public opinion if there are no comments.
There are none at this time.
Thank you very much. I have to find where I'm going here. Okay. I said I was just going to do several of the introductory slides in political socialization. And as a consequence, again, this presentation is going to be very disjointed. I'm doing that deliberately because the rest of the material should have already viewed, or at least have the opportunity to view online. So Chapter 6 deals with political socialization and public opinion. And I want to give you some basic definitions and distinctions, because there are some important ones that are discussed in this chapter. So, political scientists for many decades have been talking about political culture. And of all the terms that are set forth in Chapter 6, probably the broadest and the most enduring term that's used is political culture. This is the shared as well as the contested political beliefs of a people. What do I mean here? Well, what I mean, for example, is take the idea of liberty or freedom. Probably all Americans would say this is a good thing, this is part of our heritage, our tradition, our political culture. However, we may mean very different things by this. And so the beliefs that are embedded in political culture are associated with meanings, the ways we come to understand political affairs. Political culture is a very broad term that refers to traditions, customs, habits, and routines. And if you saw or you read President Obama's speech over the weekend at Selma, one of the things he talked about was traditions and customs and people who made American history, because he wasn't just trying to say that my opinion as president is this and this is what we should be doing. He was saying, and he has always said, here is the kind of people we are. Here are the kinds of traditions, here are the traditions and customs we have as a people, and here's what they do and should mean to us. So this president, among others, is talking about who we are. He's talking about the identity of the American people, and he's talking about American political culture. And this, again, is most deeply rooted. Public opinion changes every week, and it changes every minute depending on how pollsters ask the question. But political culture is much more ingrained in the history and the fabric of our society and our people. Values are principles that usually shape our opinion about political life. The text suggests that political attitudes or preferences, or political attitudes or opinions are preferences on a particular political issue. So attitudes and opinions tend to be more specific, rooted in values or principles that we hold as important in our own beliefs. So opinion, public opinion, and individual opinion is perhaps more shifting than the rest, especially if our political knowledge is relatively limited, which it usually is. So public opinion is the opinion of a large population about political affairs. The difficulty is that the term public suggests a unity, but a public is rarely unitary. Our country is internally diverse. So there are, in fact, several or many publics rather than just one public. So my hunch is is that as we move from political culture to political attitudes, we're moving from practices and habits of thought that are deeply rooted in our ideas and our experience and in our culture. And as we move toward political attitudes, we're looking at ideas or opinions that are more malleable or impermanent. That is, they can change. So those are some of the distinctions I would suggest you keep in mind as you view the entire PowerPoint and read the chapter and view the video. Okay, political socialization has been a topic of research for political scientists for many decades. And there are, therefore, many different definitions of political socialization. I will offer two. The first is that political socialization is the conscious and unconscious transmission of culture and values from one generation to another. So this is a very broad definition because it includes politics but doesn't limit it to politics or government. The second definition is more specifically oriented to political life, a process through which people learn political information, which may be accurate or not, form political knowledge, which presumably by definition is accurate if it's knowledge, and develop political values. So the one on top, is a broader definition of socialization. The next is more specific and tilted specifically toward American government. And I think this is the last slide. Well, I may do one more. These are the last two slides I will need to do. The rest is covered in the videos. So when political scientists look at political socialization, they're looking at how socialization shapes our attitudes and our opinion. And political scientists have identified a number of agents of political socialization. And these sometimes overlap, sometimes they conflict, sometimes they occur in different segments of our lives. So some of the more important agents of political socialization are family and kinship and the community environment that one is in, the social environment one is in, the educational system and community activities that one might be involved in, one's friends and acquaintances, one's peers, opinion leaders and public officials in the state or in the community where one lives, and media and the function that media serves, and we'll talk more about this later, among other things, is agenda setting. That is, the media can't focus and doesn't focus on everything. The mainstream media focuses generally on some issues rather than others, usually new things that are happening, and we'll talk more about that at the end of the month. And one of the things, however, that is new is the impact of new media. What does Facebook mean for American political attitudes and opinion? What does Twitter mean? What does Instagram mean? These things have only existed for a relatively few years, and so political scientists will be and are studying the impact of new media on political attitudes and opinion. So when we look at political socialization, one of the things we're looking at is demographic variables and what, if any, relationship there is between demographic variables and our political values and attitudes. And what political scientists have found is that our political views and our party identification are often shaped by our membership in or affiliation with various social or demographic groups. And the text talks about this, and the video lecture talks about it as well. And I think I'll just stop do this slide and then stop, because there's no need to overlap too much. But these are some of the demographic variables that can affect opinion and party identification. Your income, your education, your economic status, your religious denomination, the strength of your participation and commitment in religious institutions, one's race and ethnicity, one's age, Latinos, Asians, those of other national origin. Gender and marital status are important. One's state, geographic region, whether you're urban, rural, or suburban. So these factors may or may not be consistent with one or another for an individual person. In other words, when political scientists study these, they're not saying, for example, that all young people are Democrats and all old people are Republicans, or all Catholics are Republicans and none are Democrats. These are not all, determining features, because in fact we don't have just one demographic variable associated with us. We might be rural, we could be Caucasian, we could be young, we could be of a Polish background, we could be Catholic, we could be wealthy. We don't just have one demographic variable attached to us, but we have many, and sometimes these don't always, that these can cut various ways in terms of political values and party ID. For the rest of this, Chapter 6, you should be able to see the video without any problem, and I'll stop here and see if there are any comments or questions, but this should provide the necessary introduction for the remainder of the slides that you have access, or slides and video that you already have access to. Are there any comments about public opinion or political socialization? If not,
there are nothing.
Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I forgot this one slide, which was out of order because of, I don't know, the way Blackboard loaded. So let me do this one other slide on political socialization. Political socialization is not something that is unique to the United States of America. All peoples in all contemporary societies are the subjects and authors of political socialization. We're no different, because all societies seek to maintain and reproduce themselves. They want to survive. They want a future. No people plots its own overthrow or elimination. There may be conflict, maybe even very serious conflict, maybe even civil war within a society, but that itself often is in part a product of a variety of differences, major differences, and differences in socialization in the society. So that, for example, in American history, some of us were socialized into a society whose fabric was rooted in slavery. Others of us were not. If people holds millions and millions of people and other people in slavery based on their color. What socialization does is find a way to inculcate people in that society, at least the dominant group in that society, to somehow believe that that's appropriate, legitimate, just, and so on. Those who don't grow up in a culture where slavery is embedded, or in fact slavery is illegal, are likely to understand it in very different terms. Frankly, that's hard. That difference, that gap, is hard to eliminate. And so, very oversimply, that's one reason that socialization can produce social conflict, because it's the socialization based on different ways of life. So our social institutions then teach us how to think and feel about politics, all of us. Not all in the same manner, however. Political science research offers tools and concepts so that you can think and reason independently about politics. In college, saying something is so does not make it so. We require evidence to support our claims about the political world. And one of the things that research on political socialization does is it allows us to think about our own lives and our own values and our own political attitudes, and how those may in fact have been shaped by various agents of political socialization that I mentioned earlier. In my own life, there's no question that my family, even my extended family, excuse me, was a very important part of the shaping of my political beliefs. So too was my community. But for each person, it could be a bit different depending on their experience. Okay, now I'm ready to get to interest groups, I hope. Excuse me. So my research here says that you are able to look at videos on interest groups that go roughly from about slide 5 or 6 to slide 18. I went online and I confirmed that there's a video between roughly slide 5 and 18 that you have access to. And so what I'm going to do then is do roughly lecture here, slide 1 through 5, and then I'll move to roughly slide 19 and continue the discussion of interest groups, and we'll do that for the rest of today. And what remains on interest groups, if anything, we'll finish on Thursday, and we'll commence discussion on political parties on Thursday as well. Some of the video lecture on interest groups, I believe, was just kind of garbled and hard to understand. And so, in fairness to you guys, I thought it would be appropriate for me, at least it was hard for me to understand because there were multiple voices going on. And so I'm going to, recover some of that ground so that you don't lose whatever was in the lecture just by my not including it. So we're going to start with interest groups, roughly slides 1 through 5, and then we'll pick up still in interest groups at slide 19. Those between 5 and 19 were not garbled, but some of the others after 19 were. So when we talk about interest groups in American politics, one of the first people we go back to is Alexis de Tocqueville. And if you've not heard of de Tocqueville, or if you've not read of his work, you really should take the time to do it. to read his work. He wrote a 2-volume work in the 1830s based on his travels to the United States. The work was called Democracy in America, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And it remains almost, 175 years later, one of the most important and insightful pieces of writing on the politics and culture of American life. And one of the things Tocqueville argued is that the principle of association was very important in American culture in the first half of the 19th century. And by political association, he meant that the principle of association, he meant that Americans interacted with one another on a regular basis. They routinely engaged in community and social activities of various kinds. And he warned about the dangers of privatization. And many scholars in the past 40 years or so have written about the increasing privatization of American culture and how that is a harmful tendency in our society. Tocqueville is arguing that Americans, in fact, joined together to solve civic problems. They establish social relationships. They represent economic and political interests. And even today, political scientists argue that most Americans belong to at least one group, even if we don't even realize it. Probably many of you or many of your parents have in the past or still do, for example, belong to AAA. They've had a lot of competition lately in the past, say, 10, 15 years. But AAA is an interest group. If you belong to religious organizations, they usually are part of national religious organizations or institutions that sometimes participate in political life with regard to policy or what have you. If you're part of a community group that does education, if you're part of a PTA, if you're a member of an environmental group, you're part of an interest group. So Americans, Tocqueville argued, had a strong tendency to participate in groups, to associate with one another, and he saw this as a very viable and a vital necessity for democratic, small d, democratic life. So, interest groups sometimes get a bad rap. And there are a variety of what I would call narratives about what interest groups are and what they do. And those are widely shared in the media, and I'd like to talk about them because I think these narratives really misstate in some, they oversimplify. I think that's the nicest way to put it. They oversimplify what interest groups do and are. It's not uncommon for some Americans to say, we should just get rid of interest groups, not let there be interest groups. And what you're really saying is we really don't need the First Amendment or its protections anymore. You hear it's very common for political figures and presidents, even governors, whatever, to rail against the special interests. Special interests are bad. special interest is a loaded term. Democrats use it, Republicans use it. All special interests mean is that they're interests that the speaker doesn't like, that are not consistent with his or her policy preferences and political values. So this idea, the term special interest is itself generally, for the most part, rejected by political science. It's a political scientist. It's a biased use of language. Because what it does suggest is that there's some interest groups that are good, and then there's those special interest groups that are mean and nasty and harming our country. And that's just too oversimple. It's just too oversimple. And what it really is a piece of political rhetoric that lets a political actor define some nefarious, threatening, awful group of people out there. We don't know who they are. They're just special interests. And we can't let those big, bad, awful people mess up our country. And so, what this is a piece of is what politicians, all politicians everywhere, not all politicians, but most politicians everywhere, in every country, at every time, have often done. That is, they try to create some entity out there which is going to hurt you, and I am going to protect you from whatever it is. Baloney. It's just baloney. It's political rhetoric trying to get your political support. So what are some of these narratives? Interest groups corrupt political officials and governmental institutions. Here's the problem with that. Yes, it's true that governmental institutions include people who are associated with interest groups. Yes, it's true that sometimes, and when we talk later on about the Iron Triangle, I'm going to come back and make the argument that interest groups, in fact, do embed themselves in and influence, sometimes on this unduly, governmental institutions. However, what this rhetoric overlooks is that those special interests themselves are represented by individuals, and that those individuals are recruited often by political candidates, by political parties, to run for office or to run people's campaigns. So the idea that there's these nefarious people who somehow get in office and then sorry about that, try to corrupt politics or people in office by buying them is, I think, really inaccurate. It's not that that doesn't happen, but think of it this way. Our political system is much more transparent today than it was 100 years ago or 150 years ago. We live in an environment of 24/7 news. The idea that these poor congressmen and senators are somehow bought off, keep in mind, the majority of senators are millionaires already, just makes no sense. Political parties recruit candidates. When they recruit candidates, they are recruiting people who represent various constituencies and interests, and those constituencies and interests want to contribute to their campaign. The idea that somebody is a great guy, let's elect him to Congress, and then he gets to D.C., and gets corrupted is rarely the case. They are who they've always been. And parties, political parties, in fact, recruit people who already have ties to interest groups. If you were a head of a political party, wouldn't you want to recruit people to office who had a lot of money, who could fund their own campaign, or who had substantial constituency and interest group support prior to the campaign? Of course you would. That's what parties do. So this idea that somehow politicians were okay and then they get corrupted because of money, because of somebody giving $20,000 or $25,000 to their campaign, I'm not buying it. Not buying it. Does it give those people access? Yes. But you know what? Those people had access before. Then there's the opposite side of that coin. Well, interest groups are just plain Americans like everybody else trying to exercise their First Amendment rights and to participate in the political process. Oh, really? Everybody else has millions and millions and millions of dollars to move around and to help allow them to participate in politics and policy making and in campaigns? No, I don't think so. So those who are in interest groups of significance are not just folks like everybody else at all. Another kind of narrative is the big money groups always win. The candidate with the most money always wins. It's more complicated than that. In fact, big money groups do not always win, and candidates with the most money do not always win. Does it, on balance, does a lot of money help a candidate win? Probably so. But if you give me a bad candidate a lot of money, he or she is probably not going to win. Interest groups try to advance and protect their interests just like everybody else does, except they do it more actively. And almost anyone can be an active part of an interest group if they have the time, if they have the resources, if they have the interest. There's another narrative about interest groups that runs something like this. Minorities, often black people, Latinos, poor people, illegal immigrants, they get excessive federal benefits at the expense of the white majority. I once had an educated businessman tell me that older Mexicans come up to the United States to live so they can get Social Security. Well, if a 70-year-old Mexican comes to the United States to live, you know how much Social Security they get? Nothing. Not a dime. Because they never contributed to Social Security. They never worked. They were never on a payroll where they had an employer and where they contributed to Social Security. This idea that somehow people with the least amount of power in our society are organized to effectively extract from taxpayers a massive amount of benefits that are disproportional to their numbers is ridiculous. It makes no sense. It suggests that those interests, those groups that represent the least powerful in our society are the ones that get most of the benefits. That's just ridiculous. No politician does that. If you want to run for office, assuming you don't have a majority of your district or state that is impoverished or minority, which is to say almost no district or state is majority, impoverished, and minority, and/or minority, and you wish to get elected, those are not the people whose votes you're going to seek. They can't contribute to your political campaign. They can't maintain political support for you because they vote in fewer numbers and they don't have the resources and time, for the most part, to participate in a powerful way in American government. The idea that poor people get most of the benefits from federal policy or state government policy and they are ripping the rest of us off is just insanity. It's wrong. Do they get benefits? Yes. Do they have to earn those benefits? Do they have to meet certain requirements, legal requirements? Absolutely. Do those requirements go on forever? They do not. Some of them that one must contribute to initially in order to get the benefit. Others are time limited, or means tested. There are all kinds of ways that people lose benefits. If you become unemployed, for example, one of the oldest social welfare legislation examples is unemployment compensation. If you're fired, you can't get unemployment forever. And you can't make what you made working through unemployment. Then there are other conspiracy theories: communists, bankers, Jews, gay people, Hollywood. Pick your favorite bogeyman who are somehow New World Order people. There are all kinds of conspiracy theories. Here's the bottom line on conspiracy theories. They're all wrong. They don't help you understand American government. They don't help you understand American politics. They don't help you understand American society. And the reason is very simple. Conspiracies are hard to pull off, number one. Number two, most people aren't smart enough and capable enough to make a conspiracy that involves significant numbers of people be successful in a conspiracy. Somebody usually spills the beans, and conspiracies usually aren't well thought out. It doesn't mean that nobody ever conspires to do anything. They do sometimes, but the idea that there's some magic, understand how anti-democratic conspiracy theories are. If you hold to the view, if one holds the view that there's a group of people out there who are controlling some elite group, whatever they are, some foreign group, some threatening group, whatever, that are controlling everything in American politics, what are you saying? What you're saying is we as American citizens have no power, we have no control over our destiny, we are simply enslaved, there's nothing we can do, and these people are just pulling the strings and making everything happen just the way they want, and there's nothing we can do about it. Fatalism, apathy, is the implication of a belief in conspiracy theories. They make no sense. There are millions of them out there. They're all garbage. One of the early, I've already referenced E.E. Schachtschneider previously in an earlier class. His work is among the first to look at interest group politics. And the argument that he made over 50 years ago was true then and it's true now. Interest group politics, he said, has an upper class bias. And the reason is because people in the upper class, or nearly the upper class, have a wide array of resources that are unavailable to most Americans. One of the things we know that today that is significantly different from when Schachtschneider wrote 50-plus years ago is that, in fact, economic inequality is dramatically greater today than it was 50 years ago. dramatically greater, measurably greater. 50% of the American people have zero net worth. 50%. They cannot participate in interest group politics very broadly. Can they participate in interest group politics? You betcha they can. But the ways and the ways they participate and the resources they can bring to that participation start first and foremost with free, non-paid labor and numbers of people. Everybody has a political resource of one sort or another if they wish to use it or if they're able to use it. It just may not be as powerful as, you know, the head of J.P. Morgan. Okay, I need to do a couple more interest group slides, and then we'll call it a day. What's an interest group? The traditional definition of an interest group is an organized body of individuals who share some goals and who try to influence public policy. So the traditional definition, excuse me for one moment, please. I have to call you back in 10 minutes. Sorry. So the traditional definition of interest group is a group that is outside of government that's trying to influence government policy. Many interest groups are themselves associations of groups, that is, groups that join together, and or organizations that join together, rather than individuals. There are many membership groups, for example, AARP, that have members, but not all their goals are necessarily the same. They may join simply to get a variety of benefits that the group offers. Many groups, organizations, and firms seek to affect government policies and actions, things like procurement, appointment, or land use decisions. So a broader definition of interest group is that it's any organization or group of people that attempts to affect government decisions. This is a very broad definition of interest group. It includes the industrial firms and sectors, charities. I mean, why charities? Because the tax code provides tax benefits to people who make donations to charities. And if those tax benefits are reduced, then that potentially harms the bottom line and the activities of charities. Churches, public interest groups, coalitions, labor unions, political action committees, professional associations, think tanks, trade associations, and many others. So there's this broader definition includes a huge variety of organizations and groups that can be active at all levels of government, state, local, and federal. And here's another thing that is important to keep in mind. State and local governments and their various associated groups and colleges and universities are, among other things, interest groups. I'll give you one of the most obvious examples. One of the leading universities, one of the leading private universities in the country, is Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. It is a fine institution. It gets more federal health dollar money than any other health organization in the country, well, until perhaps Obamacare. So in terms of grants and that kind of thing, Johns Hopkins, for research and all kinds of things, Johns Hopkins just cleans up. And one of the reasons it cleans up is because of its proximity to Washington, D.C. But many state universities, many state colleges, Indiana University, I'm sure, literally has a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., maybe more than one. The state of Indiana has lobbyists in Washington, D.C., not just congressmen and senators, but lobbyists. Probably Indianapolis, the city of Indianapolis, has lobbyists as well. So subnational governmental agencies and governments themselves can be lobbyists. Why do we join interest groups? We join interest groups for a number of reasons. We may want to achieve certain policy goals or purposes, number one. Number two, we may get specific material or concrete benefits and services. AARP, for example, discounts at hotels and restaurants and cruises and various health products and so on. Or solidarity purposes. Maybe we want to be part of a community of like interests. So, for example, there are those in many cities and states around the country. There are those who are interested in food issues and cultivating and utilizing and developing and building local food sources and producers. You know, wineries, farms, local growers, farmers. This is an example of a community of like interests. Okay, so the rest of this is covered in the existing video that you can access. And what I'm going to do is stop for today. We've gone almost an hour, and we will pick up We'll pick up on Thursday with slide 19 on interest groups. Please look at the rest of the slides and the rest of the video on interest groups at least up to 19, and you should have Chapter 8 political parties under your belt as well. So if there are no questions, we'll pick up next time with interest group slide 19. Any comments or questions?
No.
Okay. See you next time. Thank you.